I guess, a news sense. The Al-Qasimi Foundation has been partnering with NORRAG, which is the, Alexandra, talk about network of...
It's the acronym doesn't mean anything.
Oh, the acronym doesn't mean anything. Anyway, so they're an institution based out of Geneva that specialises in educational research and really educational partnerships and networking together. So it's a network of educational agencies globally. How often is it now, Alexandra? Every quarter? They've been publishing an edition once a year. Twice or four? Two. So now they've moved to two. They have the NORRAG News. We have partnered with them now to be translating the NORRAG News, and they just recently launched the NORRAG Special Issues edition. So we are now translating this into Arabic, so that not the whole issues, but about 6 or 7 articles from that to highlight issues for the Arab world and to make the really great work that they're doing at NORRAG accessible to the region. So they're going to talk a little bit more about that this morning, and then we'll have our panel with UNESCO. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoy.
Send me the link. So I'd also like to welcome Alexandra Draxler, and she's going to be giving an overview of NORRAG and it as an organization, as well as these. And then the special edition that the Al-Qasimi Foundation was involved in translating a selection of the articles, Rasha Mohsen is going to be talking a bit more about that. So.
Hi, thank you, and I'm going to be very, very quick. So this collaboration with the Al-Qasimi Foundation is a great pleasure for us in general. We've done several things together that have been extremely fruitful. And one of them is this online publication called NORRAG Special Issue. I'd just like to tell you a little bit about NORRAG, just because to put it in context, and very quickly. NORRAG is a Geneva-based network of researchers and practitioners of educational development. It's existed for more than 30 years. The acronym used to stand for something, but it doesn't anymore, but we've kept the name anyway, so that's an unusual feature in this world. So what do we aim to do at NORRAG? We aim to be what's called an honest broker. That was coined by Bismarck, the honest broker of ideas, practices, and experience. And we aim also to build links with institutions elsewhere. We're very small. And the idea is to be a forum for exchange and to some extent capacity building of people active in international education and development. We have several ways of communicating: seminars and symposia, policy papers, a blog, a book series. We've got a book that's that we worked on together that's going to be out in this summer, printed by Edward Eldar. And then we also have formerly NORRAG News, which is now called Special Issue, and is going to come out twice a year. So what are our foci in addition to the overall thematic? It's the right to education within international education policy and in a context of reduced public spending. So we have followed with great interest and with publications and seminars the international response to the different stages of the Education for All and Sustainable Development Goals since 1990 when John Ken. We're interested in, as you heard me talk about earlier, and we have some publications about the increased involvement of the private sector in delivering policy making, threats to free compulsory education for all, the new aid and financing architecture, and we do some work in collaboration with the Geneva Institute where we're housed on emergencies, migration, and refugee situations. So our seminars and symposia, we have the symposia series that we were very grateful to be able to collaborate with the Al-Qasimi Foundation, the Open Societies Foundations, and the Graduate Institute concerning philanthropy. There was another first to what will probably be a series on the right to education in February of this year, co-sponsored by NGOs and several governments, as well as the Special Rapporteur on the right to education. We've been very active in our participation at Comparative and International Education Society conferences version in 2013, 14, 15, 17, and 18, as you can see there. And now just to talk a little bit about the special issue. It's, I have to look it up, I think it's 37 short pieces. This is quite an unusual format. The only thing I know comparable is something that you all might know, which is called The Conversation. We're no way as big as The Conversation, but it's a similar thing. Format 1,000 to maximum 2,000 words, summarizing research, either several pieces of research or one piece of research on themes that are interest to NORRAG, multi-authored, and this time we've had an external pair of guest editors, very distinguished academics from India. You see them there. I'd like to encourage all of you to go to the website, and we do have a membership of 4,000. It's free, and you get little email alerts and so forth and so on. That's the end of my dog and pony show. So here we are with so there are 36 articles, and I'll just tell you very briefly about the theme of this first special issue. There are 6 themes. So the first is about the global normative and legal frameworks and what can be done about the tools to put the frameworks for the right to education in place. I should say that the reason this right to education movement has come about has been in part the reaction of the dilution and to some extent abandonment of the idea that the right to education, free for everybody, still is a right. Facing budgetary problems, facing problems of meeting the various goals, education for all and SDG goals, there has been some backtracking on the part of international actors saying, well, private education can do part of the job, and maybe parents can make some of it, and so forth and so on. And so this is very central, this business of the right to education. Part two of this special issue, it's in 6 parts, is the evolution and reconceptualization of education. And that means legal frameworks, national legal frameworks, what's being done about them, what's not being done about them. Then there's some country case studies. Then there's some perspectives from stakeholders, NGOs, also governments. Then there's some section on the private sector. And then there's a 6th section that is also consistent with NORRAG's aims about marginalized populations or populations living to some extent in crisis. Brazil, European, Rwanda, India, and Canada. And here we go, the next part. Thank you.
First of all, we'd like Al-Qasimi Foundation is pleased to partner with NORRAG to launch the Arabic edition of NORRAG special issue. The original version of English includes 6 parts, and the Arabic edition has an article from each of the 6 parts. So these 6 articles are selected, have been selected due to relevance and potential interest to the researchers and educators and policymakers, stakeholders in the MENA region. And if you see here, we listed the name and parts of the articles, including the parts. In addition to this, we have the Arabic editorials also included on the Arabic edition. And this editorial addresses the press challenges of implementing the right to education in the MENA region. While many of the children don't have access to education due to several challenges, such as family poverty or a high population growth rate and early marriage of girls, and boys choose to drop out early from school, in addition to country conflicts. Given that there is a lack of conducted research studies and a general lack of access to policy and practices in the other contexts, This Arabic edition of NORRAG special issue aims to promote access for Arabic-speaking researchers, educators, and policymakers to read and benefit from information and perspectives shared through this channel. And once again, we would like to thank NORRAG for this collaboration opportunity to publish Middle Eastern edition of NORRAG special issue. We expect NORRAG special issue Arabic edition to serve as a platform for sharing diverse perspectives related to global education policy and international education development, and for ongoing debate over the relevant issue in the MENA region. Thank you.
Thanks very much to both of you for giving us an introduction to this exciting publication. Does anyone in the audience have any questions specifically related to NORRAG or the Middle Eastern edition that is also what Rasha just mentioned? Where can we find it?
It's on the NORRAG website. You can find it. But since I have the microphone, I'd also like to say we welcome. Oh, and you can find it outside. The Arabic edition, the copies are outside. Sorry. And you're also welcome to submit blog posts. We are very, very interested in having more authors, especially from this part of the world.
In Arabic or English?
In English. In English.
And I'd say for Arabic speakers, if you did want to run in Arabic, we would be happy to provide translation into English. So
Okay, so I'd encourage you to pick up a copy and or check out this edition online when you've recovered from the immersion of information that, that you've experienced the last few days. I think the second part of our panel is ready to come up.
So the Gulf Comparative Education Society, along with the Al-Qasmi Foundation, are very pleased to host a very special panel for this year, and also a very opportune time to conclude the conference with such a special panel. So this panel will be hosted by UNESCO, headed by Dr. Faryal Khan, and we will be having conversations about the SDG 4. Yes. SDG 4. So now we have, as I said, Dr. Faryal Khan, who is the education specialist at UNESCO. We also have Dr. Natasha Rich, who is the executive director at Al-Qasmi Foundation. And we have Mr. Frode Moring, who is the UAE representative at the UNDP. And we have Mr. Jibrin Al-Jibri, who is the director of operations at ACFund. And we also have Ms. Marisol Fernandez from UNESCO as well. So I will now pass on the mic to Dr. Faryal Khan, who will lead the session.
Thank you very much, Brian. And we would like to. Thank you so much. We would like to thank the Al-Qasmi Foundation and particularly Dr. Natasha Rich for making it possible for us to be here with you today. We have a very high-level panel, a multi-stakeholder experts, and we hope to spur some interactive policy dialogue around the emerging landscape of partnerships and strategic partnerships around sustainable development Goal 4, and we also hope to have interactive dialogue with all the participants in the room. So we want to keep this as interactive as possible. The panel will explore the specific, would it be possible to just for the panel will explore the potential contributions of the private sector and civil society organizations to build more resilient and inclusive societies. So to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal, and while our focus is on goal number 4, we are very excited to have with us Mr. Frog Moring, who is the United Nations resident representative in UAE, and we would like to also hear how Sustainable Development Goal 4 is related to the other Sustainable Development Goals, and then what does that mean in terms of partnerships and the mechanisms for partnerships. So I would just like, before we begin, I would just like to mention that while there is a great interest to increase strategic partnerships around education and Sustainable Development Goals, there has been questions about the quality of the partnerships, and are these partnerships delivering quality results? And for us, that is a very important question. How do we measure the impact of these partnerships, and how do we measure progress in achieving results? So maybe without much ado, we will begin with our representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Claude Moring. And maybe you will highlight some of the mechanisms that have been established by the United Nations, as well as the member states in this region in particular, to enhance partnerships to support the Sustainable Development Goals at regional but also at global levels.
Thanks a lot. Let me also share the thankfulness of Casimir Foundation for this important initiative. Unknown to most of you, before I joined the UN 16 years ago, I was in the private sector. Last position was that of a CEO in a large industrial company in Africa. And certainly I mention this because I have directly felt the impact of lack of education in terms of the opportunities that exist for viable private sector operations in a developing country. Where I worked, we spent almost $1 million a year at that time, 16 years ago, for training of staff, of which a lot of it was pretty elementary stuff, trying to compensate. And imagine hundreds and thousands of companies globally having to try to overcome deficiencies in the education sector. Just mention that as a backdrop from where I came from before joining the UN, and the motivation, of course, on why education in this context is so important. Now, since I'm not an education specialist, and also here more representing the UN overall, what I'm going to talk about will be more generic for SDGs, but of course also applicable for SDG 4 on education. And let me start very briefly, for those of you who are not aware, on the architecture of the UN system. All development funds, agencies, programs, and including also many of the international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, are participating in globally in what is called the UN Development Group. These days, the UN Development Group is chaired by the Deputy Secretary General, number 2 in the UN system. It's echoed at regional level with the regional directors team of all the UN agencies deployed in the field, so to speak, and also some of the regional institutions like the economic and social commissions. And at country level, the UN country team, of which I am coordinating as a UN resident coordinator for the agencies that are present here. Although, you know, UAE is not a typical case for UN cities elsewhere, because most places where there are country teams are in developing countries. We are present here for many different reasons than programs in UAE, including logistics globally and so on. So I wouldn't dwell too much on the national level in this context here. And it is the UN Development Group, the UNDG, that has established many of these mechanisms that I will be talking about as a reply to the question. So sorry to have to go a little bit around the bush, so to speak, in terms of getting to my reply to you. And one of the approaches is what we call the maps. It's very important to know what the maps are, and we're not talking about how to find the directions in a place, but it's an acronym. Mainstreaming, acceleration, and policy support. That's MAPS. And it's the common approach of the UN system to implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including at country levels. So what does that mean? Mainstreaming is about awareness. Awareness has to be mainstreamed because if people do not have the knowledge, they will not be motivated for change. The Sustainable Development Goals, more than what preceded it, the Millennium Development Goals, is more universal. It's not a poor country agenda. It's a global agenda, also for rich countries. And perhaps that requires more of people, more knowledge and awareness. High-income countries are actually not an exception to this. Acceleration is how to allocate development funds, but of course also most of all national funds, because in high-income countries almost 100% of priorities will be in national resources, of course less in the poorest countries. But even in the poorest countries, more than 60% of resources for the Sustainable Development Goal agenda will come from the country's own resources. Like for example in education, schools, investment in schools, most of it comes from national budgets, not from United Nations. And it is all these funds are allocated and how policies are set that is so important. So this is about acceleration. Policy support is of course also to not reinvent the wheel, to share experiences, and to ensure that what are good ideas are disseminating across countries to all the countries in the world. To facilitate this, there is also what's called the Partnership for SDGs online platform. United Nations Global Registry of Voluntary Commitments and multi-stakeholder partnerships to facilitate global engagement of all stakeholders in support of Sustainable Development Goals. If you try to Google Sustainable Development Goals and a lot of things, it will be an unmanageable part of information, so these platforms are set there to be able to spread information, find access to information, register information as kind of a platform to be able to share information and knowledge. Also, we recognize, and it's particularly important, I believe, in advanced countries like the Gulf state, is what we call the Technology Facilitation Mechanisms, TFM, or the United Nations Interagency Task Team. It's focused on science, technology, and information for SDGs, what we call the SDI. And it has 10-member group representatives, again, multi-stakeholder, governments, civil society, private sector, and the scientific community. It includes a multi-stakeholder forum on science, technology, and innovation for SDGs, and again an online platform as a platform of information for existing science, technology, and innovation initiatives. Also, rapid integrated assessment tools. You know, if we, as a team, goes to provide policy support, we cannot reinvent the wheels and to spend too much time in diagnostic support. And these tools are then established to be able to do this as quickly as possible to support countries in mainstreaming Sustainable Development Goals into national and subnational planning by helping access the readiness for SDG implementation. They have been conducted already in many other countries, particularly middle-income and less developed countries, and examples from the wider Arab states region is Jordan has been subject to this rapid integrated assessment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Frog-Mari. This is very, very helpful to get an overview of the global architecture and how the partnerships through multi-stakeholder platforms and maps and through various new information technologies, they are being facilitated and harnessed. I would also like to ask Dr. Natasha Ridge regarding the opportunities that the Sustainable Development Goal 4 offers to a philanthropic organization like the Al-Qasimi Foundation in Ras Al Khaimah. What new opportunities are emerging for partnership with the private sector and civil society, and how do you see the Al-Qasimi Foundation contributing then to the Sustainable Development Goal 4?
Thank you, Farrell, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Appreciate it. I think for me, being in the Gulf, we've been largely, there hasn't been a lot of discussion historically about the MDGs or the SDGs, except I think at sort of higher level things. And I think as a philanthropic organization based in the GCC, and I think increasingly more so for the GCC, it's good to start bringing that conversation out of sort of elite circles or out of government circles and start bringing those conversations and discussion about the SDGs and the MDGs, or the SDGs now, down into actual grassroots organizations. So, because I imagine when we go to schools and we ask them, what do you know about the Sustainable Development Goals, there's very little. There's not a lot of knowledge about the actual goals themselves in the Gulf. I think because the Gulf hasn't been an aid recipient, it hasn't had to adhere to many of the UN, in that sense, signatories, hasn't been part of World Bank agendas or anything like that. Because of the wealth of the region, it's been largely, I would say, almost protected from a lot of, well, not protected, that's the wrong word, but it's been largely insulated from international agreements. Although at the policy level and at the political level, there's a lot of talk about that. So I think the SDGs offer, especially with the new emphasis on partnerships, which we've found very interesting and been very happy to be a part of, a way for the philanthropic sector for the first time, I think, well, increasingly so, to have a bit more of a voice, but to also be a conduit to take that information, to take what's going on to the people that we work with, to schools, to education, local authorities, rather than just keeping those conversations very high. So I think it also, I think it offers a way to frame the conversations around education or the right to education. And I think that's been what we talked about in the NORRAG special issue, sort of linking to that, is I think the SDGs give us a framework to have conversations about education that sort of transcend class, transcend race, transcend gender, those kind of things. So I think that's one.
I think that's really very encouraging to hear, especially the issues of social and gender equality. And here we have with us Mr. Jabreen Al-Jabreen, who is the Director of Projects at ACFund, which has been since 1980 a very major player in supporting development. And perhaps, Mr. Jabreen, you might want to share a few words first about ACFund, and then also tell us how ACFund reaches out to new partners to support education.
Okay. ACFund stands for Arab Growth Program for Development. This is the name of the last 10 years. Before this name, for almost more than 30 years, they used to, in fact, name us as Arab Program for Supporting United Nations Development Organization. So we changed our, our name because we are not limited to United States, United Organization, United UN Organization. So we are open also for project support. The business goal, I can't read from my back. However, I can't read over here. ACFund is an intergovernmental institution, and it's belong to the countries of the GCC. Qatar, of course, is among them. We not by Qatar, but they are working with us. Our specialty, we are a development fund, but in fact, we are not for infrastructure. We support mainly, because our support is on human development. You could see that the objective, of course, open education is one of the top subject in our financing. Poverty alleviation also is the second. Third thing, of course, is the empowerment of women, and also the support and for the civil society organization to enhance this sector, because this is, it's not well developed in our country. And also the early childhood development.
You have about 1,554 projects in 133 countries.
Yes.
That's very impressive.
During the 37 years of work in development, we finance, what's the number there?
1,554 projects in 133
This is in fact with collaboration and cooperation with 21 United Nations organizations, and also a big number of regional organizations, NGOs, and also with around 400 NGOs, Arab NGOs, as well as governments. In fact, we every 5 years we evaluate our performance, and we adjust to our objective to the latest development in the international arena.
Thank you very much.
Okay, but I just started,
Please continue.
I would, in fact, now elaborate on our relation with UNESCO. Since Khan is with us, this goes to something like 1982. Up to now, we financed more than 100 projects for UNESCO, in many subjects, but under the mandate of UNESCO. At that time, we in fact focused on preschool, and we found that there is no development in the Arab countries, 1982, and we conducted a small survey and ended up with a report, about that this sector is really very weak, and nobody is paying attention to the preschool and also the support of the children below the 6 year, that means in the kindergarten. All the ministry of in Saudi Arabia at that time, they think that teaching the small children from 3 to 6 years are something lavish and extra lavish, because this is not supposed to be there. Support will focus on the basic education from the primary, but in fact, the kindergarten as well as the nursery are sometimes very important for the children. There's no curriculum, no a training package, and no buildings, and no training program, to be honest. So, in fact,